Cold, calculating, spineless, and heartless. These are all words that have been used to describe Caylee Anthony. In 2008, the world was captivated by the bizarre behavior of the 22-year-old mother who was accused of suffocating her own daughter and then fabricating a web of lies to cover her tracks. But if everyone was so sure that Caylee was the culprit, how is it possible that she was found not guilty? In June of 2008, the news broke that a 2-year-old girl from Florida was missing. Caylee Anthony had been missing for a month, and according to her mom, was last seen with her nanny who had been taking care of her for almost 2 years. So let's walk through the timeline of what Caylee said went down and compare it with what actually went down. On July 15, 2008, the Orlando PD got a call from Caylee's mom, Cindy Anthony, aka Caylee's grandma. Grandma told the operator that her own daughter, Caylee, had been missing for a month. She had finally located her, but her granddaughter, Caylee, was still missing. Apparently, Caylee told her mom that she had been trying to find Caylee herself instead of going to the police. On top of that, she told the operator that she found her daughter's car, and it smelled terrible, and she was afraid of what that meant. She said she had not seen Caylee Anthony since June 7th. Finally, the operator asked if Caylee was there and if she could speak to her. Caylee answered the phone, and you can first hear her tell her mother that she doesn't have anything to say to them. She was super rude and blunt to the operator, who was trying to casually be like, "So what's going on over there?" And that's when Caylee finally admitted, "My daughter's been missing for 31 days. The operator asked if she knew who had her, and she said yes, her babysitter. If only the operator and her mother had known that there was no babysitter, and there never had been. Cool as a cucumber, Caylee had made up the whole story. The operator asked her what the babysitter's name was, and without missing a beat, she said Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. Again, I would just like to emphasize, this is not a real person. So around a month earlier, Caylee had left her family home with Caylee, saying she had a work assignment in Tampa and would be traveling the whole time. For that whole month they were gone, Caylee's parents begged to see or talk to Caylee just for a moment, but every time Caylee would make up an excuse like she was too busy with work, or that she was with the nanny Zenaida, Zanny for short. On July 15th, 6 weeks after the grandparents had last seen Caylee, they got a call saying the family car had been impounded, so they drove out to the lot to pick it up. The second they got there and opened the trunk, they were hit with an unpleasant odor, and that's when the panic set in. Caylee's dad had actually been a cop for many years, and he recognized that smell right away. But there was still no sign of Caylee or Caylee, so the grandparents started calling up Caylee's friends to ask if anyone had heard from her. Eventually, they were able to find out that Caylee was at her boyfriend's house in Orlando. When the operator asked Caylee why the heck she didn't call to report her own daughter missing for 31 days, she said that she had been looking for her. She'd just been going through other resources to try to find her. The police already had Caylee as a suspect, but they questioned her as a witness in order to catch her in as many lies as possible that they could use against her in court. And if lies were what they were hoping for, then they just hit the jackpot, because Caylee was the master of manipulation. They asked how long Caylee had known Zenaida, and she told them 4 years this Christmas. She said she was introduced to Zenaida by a friend she worked with at Universal Studios named Jeffrey Michael Hopkins. She said Jeffrey had used Zenaida as a nanny for his son, Zach, and introduced the two. Caylee told investigators that Jeffrey had since quit Universal and moved to North Carolina and then down to Jacksonville. Well, this was all news to Jeffrey Michael Hopkins once he took the stand 2 years later. The poor, confused guy said that he'd met Caylee briefly years ago, but unlike her story, Jeffrey said they were acquaintances at best. They'd never worked at Universal at the same time. Jeffrey didn't have any kids or a nanny, and he had never lived in North Carolina or Jacksonville. But that was the story she told the investigators the first day they'd questioned her, so she had to stick with it. She walked them through the last time she saw Caylee, saying she dropped off Caylee at Zenaida's house on June 9th to go to work at Universal Studios, where she was an event coordinator. When Casey got off work, she drove to Zanny's apartment, but no one answered. Allegedly, she called Zenaida's cell and it was out of service. Well, with no response and no Caylee, she said she decided to go to her boyfriend Anthony's house. She said she also talked to one of her co-workers at Universal named Juliette Lewis, who was an event coordinator like herself. How many lies do you think are in that one short sentence? Would you believe me if I told you 3? Juliette Lewis, of course, doesn't actually exist. Casey wasn't working at Universal and hadn't worked there in almost 2 years by the time Caylee went missing. She also wasn't an event coordinator either when she worked there. She was one of those photo kiosk people that sold pictures taken of guests on the Incredible Hulk ride. The investigators asked Casey if she could lead them to any addresses of importance, and she was like, for sure. She then proceeded to walk them to a few random addresses with no relation to the crime, before taking them to Universal Studios, where she said she allegedly still worked. She walked them all the way through the park to this back building. It was legit over a 25-minute walk, before Casey turned around and started laughing at them and told them she didn't work there anymore. And the detectives were like, Casey, you rascal, you got us. Yeah, not quite. They were livid and immediately took her into the nearest empty room at the theme park for questioning. Allegedly, one of the first times Casey would tell the truth during the investigation would be weeks later when her parents were finally able to visit her in jail. They asked her if she could feel in her heart where Caylee was, and asked if she felt she was nearby or far away. Casey said in her heart, she thought Caylee was not very far at all. We now know this to be true because months after she had first been reported missing, Caylee's skeletal remains would be found less than a mile away from the family home. After 1 month in custody, Casey's lawyer was able to get her out on bail. 2 months later, Casey was arrested on the charge of taking her daughter's life and was taken to jail that night and officially booked. She would spend 2.5 years awaiting her trial. When that fateful day finally came, most people thought the case was closed before the trial had even started. When Casey's internet searches from the last day Caylee was ever seen alive were read to the courtroom, people were horrified. That day, around 2:50 p.m., Caylee Anthony searched the terms suffocation and foolproof suffocation. In the following weeks, while Caylee was supposedly missing, Casey went out partying with her friends. She's captured in multiple photos, partying at clubs, participating in a hot body contest, and getting a tattoo that said Bella Vita, an Italian motto that meant beautiful life. On July 5th, 2011, the 12 members of the jury found Casey not guilty and acquitted her of the crime against Caylee Anthony. And if that isn't the biggest record scratch you've ever heard. That's right. Instead, they only found her guilty of lying to the police, for which she received 1 year in jail. People were absolutely outraged and couldn't believe the jury had made this call. But years after the trial, a few members of the jury had come forward to explain why they ruled this way. One of the male jurors spoke with reporters a month after the trial ended and said that overall, the entire jury agreed that they didn't like Casey at all and that she was a horrible person. There was no doubt about that. They gave us a lot of stuff that makes us think that she probably did something wrong, but not beyond a reasonable doubt, the juror said. 10 years later, the juror said he's thought about the case every single day and how much acquitting Casey bothered the jurors. But he said they had to battle their consciences and vote as they were instructed on what was proven in the courtroom. And the truth was, they just couldn't conclusively prove that Casey had done it, so they had to vote not guilty.